Deborah Smith in the ceramics department of the University of Southern California in 1969, where we found in each other a very vague interest in the philosophies of the East. Deborah arrived at the Sri Aurobindo ashram the day before Christmas in 1970. She asked if she would build a pottery. I arrived in Pondicherry 3 months later and began building. 54 years later, Deborah makes her exit. Her legacy, the golden inch pottery, her brush, her quest for simplicity and perfection in virtually everything she touched. A hand that touched many in the world of Indian ceramic art, some of whom are gathered here tonight. Six of us will speak of their experience with Deborah, of their companionship, their respect and love for this amazing woman that I am privileged to call my partner in life. We all get together, share more stories. Maybe it becomes a book or a chapter in her book that is yet to be finished. I can hear her now. A book? What have I done? Okay, so then, first we want Nini to say something, read something from Savitri, which gives some background on the name of the pottery. Okay?
Deborah, who I met between Christmas and New Year of 1970, has been a dear friend and will always remain so. She and Ray used to love reading together from Savitri, and like he said, the name comes from a passage which I'm going to read now from Sri Aurobindo's Savitri. At the head she stands of birth and toil and fate. In their slow round the cycles turned to her call. Alone her hands can change time's dragon base. Hers is the mystery the night conceals. The spirit's alchemist energy is hers. She is the golden bridge, the wonderful fire. The luminous heart of the unknown is she, a power of silence in the depths of God. She is the force, the inevitable word, the magnet of our difficult ascent, the sun from which we kindle all our suns, the light that leans from the unrealized vasts, the joy that beckons from the impossible, the might of all that never yet came down. All nature dumbly calls to her alone, to heal with her feet the aching throb of life, and break the seals on the dim soul of man, and kindle her fire in the closed heart of things. All here shall be one day her sweetness's home. All contraries prepare her harmony. Towards her our knowledge climbs, our passion gropes. In her miraculous rapture we shall dwell. Her clasp shall turn to ecstasy our pain. Our self shall be one self with all through her.
I tried to memorize it and then realized that I wasn't going to be able to, so I'm going to just read it out. I met Debbie more than half a life ago. I knew even then that the time I would be spending here was going to be one of the most special, life-defining of experiences for me. Every sense was alive, every moment still etched in my memory. I was sad when I finished my 2-year stint, but I needn't have worried. Those years were like a seed that grew into a full-fledged tree, and I have come back over and over again. So what does one share from a lifetime of memories when all are precious? I remember grabbing Romer, my son, when he was just a few months old and heading to the airport in Kolkata, not to go anywhere, but to meet Debbie, who was changing planes and had a couple of hours in between. She told me that she had never forgotten that. And more years later, we went sightseeing together in Pondi. Sri Aurobindo's room was open, but I couldn't go in with my daughter, who was then only 3 years old. So Debbie entertained her by riding around town with her in an auto rickshaw until I had finished. She didn't forget that either. There was a weekend marooned in a freak spring snowstorm at a friend's hogan in Arizona. We found 1,000-year-old pottery shards still showing the fingerprints of their long-gone makers and watched the stars. Debbie even taught us throwing, filling in for Ray while he was in Tuticorin. It was a girls-only affair, and we spent many a giggly summer evening scarfing cucumbers dipped in gomashio and ice-cold gazpacho. My husband Sanjay jokes that he was accepted into our circle only when he had won Debbie over. We all came to Golden Bridge drawn by the big picture view of clay and art, but what bonded us was the experience. What I came to appreciate was how this place we all gravitated to was not built from the outside in, a coloring in of the outlines, but formed incrementally, each element perfectly detailed, seamlessly dovetailed. No right or wrong side, no up or down, front or back, a careful, considered intersection of beauty and function. This was Deborah's way, her legacy to us, and like an ever-expanding mandala, it ripples on outwards.
I'm Hannah, Deborah's one and only sister. There were four of us, four Smith siblings, and I never thought that we would be missing any of us, at any time in my whole lifetime. But life goes on, it changes. As I said, I'm the oldest. Next came Louis, 2 years younger than myself. And then Debbie, about 2.5 years beyond that. And we've lost those two in the past 1.5 years now. And there's still Marty, who will speak to you in a few minutes. Our family will be forever grateful for the loving care of Debbie's remains by the ashram and others. I saw many pictures from that time about 2 weeks ago, and I felt I was there. Debbie, my only sister, I will miss you so much. We had a close relationship that only lucky sisters can have, even at a great distance. I was always in Los Angeles, and she was here, but I visited here 12 times. That's how much the draw of Pondicherry, Debbie's work, her enthusiasm for her life here with Ray, and all she did here. And I got to know India. If we had lived next door to each other, I wouldn't know anything about India, I don't think. Debbie was a unique, one-of-a-kind person. I want to relate to you some things about her early years before India. What was she like? Both her inner feelings and outer actions. From the beginning, as a small child, she made sure that she was not to be considered the skinny little tag-along pesty sister, which we sometimes thought she was. She wanted to be noticed and to be heard, so she was loud, saying, "I'm here, look at me, I'm worth something, pay attention to me." And that went on for a long time. In 1950, 8 years after her birth in 1942, the family moved from Los Angeles to Riverside, California, and Debbie settled down a bit from that screechy little 4-year-old. Now she was a cute schoolgirl with a pack of friends, but she was not the girl to play with dolls or do typical girly things. We lived on 10 acres where she raised sheep and entered them in county fairs for competition. At school, she was top in her class, acing all her exams. She had a part in a play at the local theater, and she loved to recite poems, silly ones, or even murderous kinds of ones, like Rudyard Kipling wrote. Which reminds me that she could still remember some of those silly poems as long as 6 months ago and loved to recite them. She had a talent for art, of course, and was attracted to all beautiful things, especially flowers. She loved to wrap gifts in creative and elaborate ways, but she also caused us much anxiety because she would spend hours wrapping gifts for special holidays. While the food on the holiday table was getting cold, she was still upstairs, doing her detail work, and I'm sure some of you know about that. At this time, in her early teen years, she and our mother had long and loud discussions about life. Their voices filled the air in our house for a long time. I believe this was the beginning of her questioning what her path in life would be. Would it value most being respectable and making other people happy, like her mother's lifelong values? Or was her path to happiness going to be different? And what was that going to be? Of course, this was part trying to get away from her mother's influence and establishing her own identity, which is very common for mothers and daughters. But she felt it acutely. However, she did graduate from high school, she was almost completed, but she got bored with school, and she transferred to a private school where she was allowed to take harder courses, and she graduated successfully from there. Then she went on to Stanford University. But the college road became rocky when she developed narcolepsy, a kind of sleeping sickness, making it hard to stay awake in class. Her teachers sometimes accused her of partying all night when she couldn't stay awake in her classes. She began to question what the school required of her to study. She quit the school off and on, but finally graduated with a degree in Japanese language. She was the only person in the graduating class that had majored in Japanese. She took it just to be different, I think. By her 20s, she had become a beautiful young woman, but still searching for her own ways. At this time, she was rather experimenting with what her path might be. She loved clothes and always looked like $1 million in her tall, model-like frame. She volunteered at the local children's hospital. She had lots of boyfriends. She took weaving lessons and joined the Freedom Riders in the southern United States, helping to register Black voters. Personally, she was challenged by her narcolepsy, but like so many young people in America in the 1960s, she was also questioning the status quo. Above all, she wanted to do something meaningful, something different, not the expected way. That was not enough for her. Then 3 things converged in her life that set her on the path that you know, and little by little, life and a future opened up for her. These are not in particular order, but one thing that took place in, I think it was the late 60s, she took a trip to Japan, helping a friend write a book. And she was a translator, and she ended up living with a master Japanese ceramic artist. She discovered clay. Then she also discovered Sri Aurobindo and his teachings through a friend in Los Angeles. And finally, you can guess, she met Ray in a ceramics class. So she came to Pondicherry to learn and live about the mother and Sri Aurobindo. Jay joined her, and she began GBP in due time. She had changed from that conflicted young person who at first demanded to be noticed, then searched in many trial and errors for answers for her life. as a young adult and finally discovered it in India. She became a soft-spoken, loving, and caring person. She found answers to her inner quest for the meaning of her life. And very importantly, Debbie came to love our mother very deeply and understand her completely. One of my best memories is the way Debbie, after she had been in India, she would come home and she'd stroke her mother's hair, and push it back. And you could just see the love coming through her. Debbie expressed lifelong attachment to beauty in making beautiful pots, many with flowers. She accumulated many friends and helped many others. Hers was a special and beautiful life, devoted to a deep spiritual center. I will always treasure my years with her.
I first met Deborah when I came to attend Susan Peterson glaze making workshop, 1997. Literally pushed by my teacher Jyotsna Bhatt to come. I was not ready to come. I had just finished NID and I was very tired and I said, who goes for a glaze making workshop? When I arrived here, awe-struck me, instantly fell in love with ever-smiling, gentle, super manager artist Deborah. When I saw those meticulously designed glaze testing stations at that workshop, I was beyond just impressed. Just to be there with 20 other potters, with Ray, Deborah, and Susan for a month was a turning point in my life. I joined GBP in 2005 not just to learn to throw pots, but to be around these two inspiring people, witnessing their work journey and absorb. As I started my journey as a student and an assistant teacher, we were told not to loiter around the production area and unnecessarily talk with workers and disturb Deborah while she was working or painting pots at her desk. After some time, somehow I managed with permission to stand quietly to watch her paint. Soon we started having small conversations about various things like clay, firing techniques, students, even travel and family matters. We just became much comfortable with each other. She loved small talks over tea breaks and loved listening to stories, and I had many stories to tell. We would often talk about my travels in rural areas and her interest in knowing about local cultures. I would bring her various textile samples and small gifts, and she would curiously ask me about the maker, area of origin, etc., and write it all in her small notebook. As I was preparing for a solo show while at GBP, Deborah decided to take me in her care and guidance to make sure that everything goes well, from packaging to display systems to even discussing about pricing of the pieces. We decided to do a small preview display at GBP before it all leaves for Baroda for final exhibition. She was very excited and made arrangements to display my freshly made pots at her space, popularly known as Debbie's Den. Our relationship turned into thick friendship. She became a fan of my cooking skills and Gujarati food. She would make special requests for Guju food and bring potter friends and guests over for a meal and enjoy it thoroughly. When I would approach her with any problem or difficulties for guidance, she would say, Rakhi, you will do what you need to do when time comes. We all do it. Deborah quietly sitting at her desk, painting away every product that was produced at GBP, meticulously preparing drawings, charts, and shelf plans for loading, putting up handwriting calligraphy price labels for every product, eating lunch from ashram tiffin, and having a nap in her den with a small table fan are the images etched in our minds and hearts. Dear Deborah, those deep conversations are going to be missed. Your gentle smile and care and constant mentoring is going to be missed. You live in all of us.
Out of the flood of Deborah memories of the last 2 weeks, something else emerged. I saw Golden Bridge pottery as an arc, a craft, launched by Deborah and by Ray, and its story one of improbable, audacious adventure. 40 years have swooshed past since I, as a somewhat shy and sheltered 23-year-old, had the privilege of hopping on board. Deborah, lady of 81 summer solstices, yours was a deeply embedded dignity sustained by a vigorous work discipline, frugality, courage. In brushwork as in wordsmithing, you transcended craft with a fluid stroke and the mot juste, an unerring flair for the grammar of each. When it comes to preparing a home or a studio for an event, I channel you. Yours is the voice in my head. I cannot channel your courage. From those memories, I pluck one. Returning one night from an exhibition of Citadines Art Gallery, Auroville, the taxi lights creating a tunnel of green, we sang a gory song. The Irish ballad Rickety Tickety Tin by the irreverent Tom Lehrer. We sang with gusto and with glee. I would like to read an excerpt from the poem After the Visit to an Ashram by Harriet Fulton Smith, Deborah's mother. Ah, yes, I know that in this instant our timepiece hour is unequal, yet it is morning and sunset all at once, and though the whole earth is between, distance, as always, is no matter. I have the crowning gift, even while each precious day of mine by clock approaches night, you, my daughter, are waking to a sunrise, not only of the day, but of the heart. Thank you, Deb, for bridging continents and cultures and leaving me your spirit to converse with.
So I'll just read something from my point of view and then after for my mom. My connection with Debbie started when I was born. She was the first one to hold me when the nurse brought me out of the operation room. And then for my rice ceremony, Debbie, in the Kerala tradition, whispered my name thrice in my ear. My middle name is given by her, so initials are read as Gem, Gauri Eliza Meneghetti. And in all these years, for birthdays, my sister's birth, she gave us wishes. Also when she traveled, books and toys from the US, sweets in beautiful origami box from Japan, and handmade fans from Fuping. When I showed an interest in Japanese, she gave me her kanji book. There was always small, precious things from around the world, which was a wonder. I enjoyed meeting her family and having lunches and dinners, and as I grew, sometimes casually at a dinner, Debbie would mention meeting Boris Johnson at Golden Bridge Pottery and asking for his job description. All this happening in our little world here. I'm glad to have celebrated her 81st birthday a month ago with her, memories that will remain with me. A person, gentle and elegant, was always there to watch over me and my sister Sama. We're grateful for Debbie for the love and blessings which will guide us in our lives. Christine Michael asked my mother to write an article on Debbie, and Supriya wrote this and read it to Debbie on the 24th of April before sending it. To Debbie with flowers. I arrived in Pondicherry on the 28th of February, 1994, as a student of Ray Meeker at Golden Bridge Pottery. I was 25 years old and full of excitement and joy to start this new chapter in my life. I like to believe that this was one of the best times at GBP. Deborah Smith was full on with heading the pottery production, and the 3-chambered wood kiln was being fired regularly and often in a 3-week cycle. While Ray was constructing firehouses, and in my second year, he was working for his first solo show at Aisher Gallery. I was a student who was curious about this new world, a place created, almost brought into the earth from somewhere. There was an indescribable beauty to it. The walls were a soft gray, terracotta tiled roofs covered the area. A huge, beautiful tree with its green leaves flowed across the pottery, and the rich forms and glazed stoneware pots reached every corner. A large round dish was placed at the entrance, in which every morning the amma would fill it with fresh water and flowers from the pottery. This was the welcome. Once inside this kingdom, the whole world turned ethereal. In my restless curiosity, I would often walk around the production area and watch the work going on. The clay making, wedging, throwing, trimming, handles being pulled, and the greenware being sorted for bisque firing. The bisqueware was being arranged, the loading chart being prepared, and Debbie would be sorting them for the different glazes. When the glazed works were being sorted for orders, it was a good time for our students to buy for our collection. All this was mesmerizing, especially watching Debbie paint. And of course, with one look from Debbie, followed by the question, "Why are you not at your wheel?" I would be just snapped back into reality, replying, "Just watching," though in reality I would spin back in no time to my wheel and practice my throwing. Deborah Smith ran Golden Bridge Pottery with a skill and organization at a very high level, where beauty, skill, and material is respected and revered. This wisdom was shared with us students, and after the day was done, all the materials would be cleaned. This was as important as any other action of the work. After 4:30 p.m., when the bell rang for the end of the day, Debbie would still be painting or firing, and I would go to watch her, stay and chat. This continued for my 2 years as a student, and later too when I attended workshops and went to visit. Debbie would be sitting there with her brushes and stains concentrated and diluted, surrounded by a bowl of water, a bowl of transparent glaze, a needle, and a banding wheel. While painting with wax, she had a different set of brushes and a stove heating the wax. All the material were neatly arranged and well cleaned. In 1994, Debbie was painting flowers with blue pigments and abstract strokes for wax-resist works. She would work with such elegance, from the movement of her wrist to the way the brush would move with a certainty and assurance. The colors would flow into the outline of the flowers, the leaves, the dots, and the tendrils would flourish, and in time, a set of plates, soup bowls, mugs, tureens, large serving dishes would be ready to load into the kiln. While painting with wax, Deborah would dip the wax brush deftly into the hot wax and paint quickly before the wax went cold on the brush. Debbie is a perfectionist. Her work area and the pottery would reflect this. They would always be kept neat and tidy with all the material in the right place. Jairani, the lady assisting Debbie, would pass the dish to paint, which Debbie would place on the banding wheel, and with one gentle tap, the dish would be centered. She would paint a border and then begin to fill in the part of the dish with flowers, well balancing and positive in the negative spaces. Once completed and approved by a look, the dish would go on to the ware board. Deborah would paint almost all the ware that was fired in the 3-chambered kiln. The first 2 chambers were for glaze, fires, and saggers filled with painted ware. The 3rd chamber was for bisque firing. In the many years in which I visited GBP, Debbie would be in the office working on accounts, sending posts, checking the throws, arranging ware, preparing loading charts, checking firing logs, and sometimes she would also be tending to the flowers. Many a time she would be painting, though she never signed her works. However, I'm sure most of us students can easily spot her work. The richness of the wood firing, the paintings, and the forms made each of her work a unique exhibition. When I look back, I was with my silly worries, sometimes unnecessarily troubled, and I would be chatting away. Debbie would be patiently helping me out by saying exactly the right words to solve my troubles and encourage me. More than anything, with her brush strokes, all the troubles vanished and life turned blissful.
I didn't come all this way to mourn Debbie's passing. Debbie, I was here earlier this year and a couple more times, once with Hannah, and Debbie was suffering. And she needed a rest. She was done. So I came here to celebrate what's an extraordinary life. And I join with all of you to recognize and remember and celebrate that wonderful life that she lived. I can't talk about the pottery. I can't talk about her turn at the wheel or her brush strokes. I wasn't here then. I went many years without seeing her. And so I can only speak as her little brother and my perspective on Debbie and who she was. I was 6 years her junior, and she was closest to me in the birth order, so we were naturally fairly close, although I was outside of the core group of Hannah, Lou, and Debbie, and always felt it. But Debbie was my protector. I looked up to Debbie like no brother ever could. I loved her, I adored her. She had an enormous energy. She was artistic. She was smart. She was also mischievous, irreverent, rebellious. All these things I learned to admire in Debbie. She set a good example for me. So, of all those things, I can just throw out a few. Hannah covered her life very completely. I don't know what you left for me to talk about, but I'll throw out a few memories. Debbie was very clever, and there's a story about her having to write an essay, and she was late getting it done, and it's an apocryphal story. I don't know if it happened when she was in college or junior high. There seems to be some disagreement about that, but in any case, she decided she could write. It was a creative writing course, and she could decide to write about anything, a one-page essay. And she was late, so she took a piece of paper and she punched a bunch of holes in the paper and one big hole in the middle. And then she wrote around that. She says, there's not much room left for me to say much of anything here because the holes are taking up all the space on the page. So I'll just let the holes speak for themselves. And she turned that in. And the students loved it. I don't think the professor or the teacher did too much. We lived on a farm, and I remember, like Hannah mentioned, that Debbie was taking care of sheep. I particularly remembered her in a starched white uniform going off to county fairs and winning blue ribbons. I was so impressed with her. She also had a horse. She had a good life, but she was equally comfortable mucking stables on the farm and tending to her sheep and boots in the mud as she was out with her many boyfriends on the town, dressed to the nines. So she could do it all. When we moved to Los Angeles, when Deb was around, I think 16 or so, I would have been 9. And what I remember then was that we spent a lot of time watching dumb television shows, which Deb just drank up. And what I learned from Deb is that everything could be interesting and everything could be enjoyable. And we'd watch mysteries, we'd watch westerns, we'd watch quiz shows, and she was always making everything more interesting to me because she loved so much the window that television was on the world out there and that she could see. We also talked about how much chocolate sauce to put on our popcorn. One day, talking about her adventurousness, she came home and she had bruises all over her arms and all over her legs. And I said, my God, Debbie, what have you been doing? And she'd been out with a boyfriend. And I said, well, what are the bruises from? And she said, well, I've been skydiving. She didn't tell anybody she was doing this. She came back. She had had to jump off of a small 10-foot platform into a sand pit for an hour or two before they would take her up and drop her out of a plane at 3,000 feet. But that was Debbie. She was going to do anything once, at least. And she had that kind of spirit. I was 9 or 10, and I knew that I wanted to be a paratrooper at that point. She did more things. Hannah mentioned that she went down to Mississippi and participated in the Freedom Rides, the registration of African Americans, and protesting the Jim Crow laws, the segregation laws in the South. She was alive on a personal, social, political level, on all levels. The closest I got to Debbie, though, was on a trip that we took across the country. I had been in school in the Northeast, and I was leaving school, and somehow Debbie shows up and says, let's drive across the country together. I'll take you back to LA. And I said, well, great. Of course, I was going to have to do all the driving because Deb's narcolepsy prevented her from taking the wheel. I wasn't going to have it. But we talked a lot. We would stop along the roadside and draw. And I learned on that trip after several days, or maybe a week, that Deb was at that point in her life really struggling. Deb was struggling for a number of reasons. My father's passing, she'd never really reconciled with him. She had a stormy relationship with her mother that wasn't resolved. And most of all, she had been prescribed Ritalin to treat her narcolepsy, and it really wasn't working. And we shared motel rooms across the country, and she could wake up in the middle of the night with a hallucination, and it was really hard to watch. And she and I talked, and what I realized was that she was seeking at that time to find peace, and she didn't quite know how. And I think what happened over the next months after that trip is that she recognized that she needed a spiritual solution to her problems and not a medical one, not a prescription drug. And she had at that time, through the East-West Center in Los Angeles, discovered Sri Aurobindo, she discovered pottery, and Ray at University of Southern California. So she landed here in Pondicherry on that spiritual quest. And the story is pretty well known to all of you at that point. She found purpose in pottery, and a centering of her being that she had not achieved before. She told me that she came to Pondicherry because it was simpler. She told me there was 1 or 2 cars here at the time, and life was just easier to digest than America was at the time. So many years go by, and at this point I should just thank all of you for the support that all of you provided Debbie. All of those who were her students, her friends, and Ray Meeker for supporting and caring for Debbie all these years. Of course, finally she is attacked by Parkinson's, and as it progressed and she was unable to go to the pottery and unable to paint, unable to steady her hand, this really took away what had been her salvation. And it was, gradually over time, the end. She was unable to continue to pursue the life that she so cherished. Hannah and I would try to call her every Saturday and talk to her on the phone as she was declining. And what I remember very clearly is that we would ask her, "How are you?" And she would give this big existential sigh and say, "I don't know." And that was Deborah. She didn't know. She had gotten lost. And as time went by, she told Ray that she was ready to go. We're all going to miss her, of course. And we're all going to be so much less without her. But we're all so much more, I think, for having had her in our lives. Her smile, the sparkle in her eyes, and her incredible love of life. I'm going to close here with a tribute to Debbie that comes from Robert Waters performs this. It's going to be a piece of music. It's Bach's Sonata in C major for solo violin. And it was performed for this occasion by Robert Waters, who's husband of Antra Sinha, who's now teaching ceramics at Utah State University. Okay? So I don't know if you could hear, but Ray says there's snacks and drinks, and we can all rise and mingle and tell more stories. And again, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for coming.